Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Lions Grid. This is episode 15, the recap after last night's game between the Browns and the Lions. The Lions, of course, coming out on the wrong side of that, finishing the preseason 0-4. So we'll have to wait until the start of the regular season for them to get anything in that win column. And Joe, we sort of talked about it, the game for not being the most entertaining game in terms of, there's not a whole lot of expectations. We know the starters weren't going to be playing, all that good stuff. We made it through there without any major injuries, which is great. But kind of disappointing. Another preseason come and gone, and the Lions 0-4. What are your thoughts about last night's game and the preseason as a whole?
Well, I'm just happy that preseason's over with. You look at these four losses and you realize that it's only preseason. The losses don't matter. What matters is evaluating talent, seeing who's the best fit for the team, who's making plays, who might be good to have on the practice squad. But as far as having win-losses are concerned, I mean, you can basically call this the preseason and throw out all losses because they're meaningless. They're just practice scrimmages. So you can wipe the slate clean. You can start fresh, get your team down to 53 people, and go into the regular season knowing, hey, we didn't execute this well in preseason. Maybe some of the starters can execute this better. Now that we have uncluttered our team and we have only players that are going to play in the games on the team, now we can start our real practices with people who are going to be on the team and see what type of schemes we can run from here on out. It's tough to gain a grasp of, what coaches are working on in the preseason. They probably just want to see how some plays work, what some players' attributes are, and things like that. We didn't really get a good look at the starters in preseason at all. So when you look at the regular season and the start of it, you're not really going to know a team's identity until they play each game. It's going to unravel, and we'll get the complete picture of the team as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think you're right on there with a lot of points. Obviously, the preseason, the record doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, these games don't, they don't determine whether or not you get into the playoffs, anything like that. They have no ramification. I think from my point of view, I think the only thing that is kind of disappointing about it is how much they struggled through the preseason. Obviously, they struggled last year, and you can go 0-4 in the preseason and still have a perfectly successful season. My concern, and one of the things we've been talking about is like the must-do thing for the Lions here at the start of the season is to get off to a hot start. So obviously after going through 4 rough games in the preseason, there's definitely some concern on my part with, whether or not they're going to be able to get to that hot start. But, with the preseason done and over with and it behind us, the next thing is you got to play the game and step up. So at this point, it doesn't really matter what happened in these 4 games. Again, they're not going to impact the final destination of the season. So the games really start mattering week 1 against the Cardinals. So we'll have to see. I mean, there were definitely, looking at the game specifically, at that first offensive drive where Tom Savage was in his QB, the first 2 plays for the Lions, the first play Tom Savage got sacked and it was right up the middle, and then the second play, the other defensive tackle came right up the middle and almost took the handoff and got a big tackle for a loss. So I know one of the things you were talking about before the game that you would have your eyes on was the play of the offensive line, particularly the guards themselves. And it was kind of a rough game from that aspect. From the very start, there were a lot of pressure up the middle of that offensive line, and you could see they sort of struggled there. So it, obviously the starters weren't in. But as we talked about, injuries definitely do happen, and those are going to be the guys that we're going to be counting on to fill in should someone get hurt. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about the offensive line play from last night, Joe, but I definitely, that first drive was not impressive. I think they did a little better as the game moved on, and especially when Josh Johnson came in, he was definitely more mobile, and I think that helped him out. But Tom Savage looked pretty rough, and if I had to choose between the two of them, based off of what I've seen through the preseason to be the backup QB, I think I would go with Josh Johnson myself. But what were your thoughts about the offensive line play and the backup QBs?
Yeah, I like the touchdown that Josh Johnson scored. He faked out a couple defenders on his way into the end zone, and really the offensive line, the backups, and even the starters have really struggled all throughout preseason, and we can only hope that some roster moves are made to solidify a somewhat solid, average, decent offensive line. I mean, because like let's face it, that's 5 guys on offense out of 11 that all have to play the position of blocking the defense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may have 3 of them have a good play and 2 of them get beat. All it takes is for one defender to beat one offensive lineman, and then all of a sudden your quarterback's in trouble. So really to have 5 solid offensive linemen that aren't going to give up play after play is tough to orchestrate. So that's something the Lions need to figure out on how to create the best lineup offensively on the offensive line, how to figure out how to move the ball, get time in the pocket, rush the ball. And I do agree that I think Savage has no pocket awareness, and he just doesn't have a good snap count, a good timing for when he snaps the ball and gets the defense usually at their peak time of when they're ready to get to the quarterback. So I think Johnson's got a better grip of the offense and the tone, but still I'm not liking either of these guys as quarterback. And you know, we seem to have a lot of Johnsons on the team to get rid of the image of Calvin Johnson. We got Ty Johnson, Kerryon Johnson, Josh Johnson. It's like, do we ever have enough Johnsons?
Yeah, there quite a few on the team, and yeah, I think obviously Tom Savage was coming off that concussion, so you know he just got cleared to come back to the game, or just got cleared out of the concussion protocol, and this was his first game back. So I don't fully fault him for that. I get there's probably going to be a little bit of dust you have to shake off and things like that as you're coming back from a pretty serious injury. But at the same time, I think you're right. I think part of the problem is that offensive line play. I think since Tom Savage is more of that pure pocket passer, who's the guy that has to set up and have the time, it makes it difficult for him to be successful given how poorly the offensive line played. Whereas Josh Johnson, because he is more mobile, he has the ability to create some space for himself in case there's a breakdown on the line. I think it makes him a little better equipped given some of the concerns that we have to be our backup QB. Obviously, he's still not a great choice. Like, I wouldn't feel necessarily comfortable with him starting multiple games should Stafford get injured, but I think he's out of the two of them, between him and Tom Savage. I think he's the way to go. And you mentioned earlier the need to cut down to the 53-man roster. So the deadline for that, we pointed that out in an earlier video as being one of the dates to keep in mind, being August 31st, which is tomorrow, Saturday. The Lions need to be down to 53 players by 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So currently, based off of the last updates I saw, they're down to 86 on the roster currently. Of course, they had released Zach Zenner earlier, but they brought on another running back, James Williams, at that point. So they're still pretty full in the running back position. But today, so far, a lot of the cuts to get down to that 86 have been in the secondary. The Lions have moved on from Tease Tabor. He was released. They also released Andre Kachery, and then also Andrew Adams. He's a safety that we picked up from Tampa Bay in the offseason. So far, a lot of the cuts have been in that secondary. They also got rid of Micah St. Andrew from the offensive line group. So those are the 4 cuts so far. Still a long way to go to get down to that 53 number. So definitely expect there to be some more movements there. But in addition to players leaving the Lions team, there's also going to be a lot of people getting cut from the other 31 teams in the league. So to your point about the Lions needing to assemble the best squad possible for that offensive line group, there may be a chance for them to upgrade some guys in the backup positions based off of who else gets let go from the other team. So certainly it's definitely going to be interesting to keep an eye on who else, who makes the 53-man roster for the Lions. But it's also going to be interesting to see who gets sent out there to free agency that the Lions could potentially add to maybe shore up some of those weaknesses on their offensive line and in some other positions. So I know from the Raiders, Brandon Marshall, the linebacker, was recently cut, and we've talked about the linebacker position being an area where we're not totally comfortable with the depth there. Potentially could be something the Lions might want to take a look at. So there's I think it seems like a pretty big task to go from 86 players down to 53, but I think even once they get down to 53, there's certainly still a chance that things will be changing because the other teams are going to be letting go of a lot of good people too. So certainly something over the next couple of days to keep an eye on before the start of the season. But yeah, I mean overall, the final score of the game, 16-20. Not a whole lot there going on for the Lions, as we mentioned. They did get a safety in the first half, which was nice. It was based off of that holding call, so it was nice to see. I think we only got 1 sack in the game, and then there was that holding call that led to the safety. But it was nice to see, even though it was the backup squad, see them get some pressure on the QB, because that's one thing that they haven't done a really great job of so far in the preseason. And I did mention that Isaac Nawada was a guy that I would be keeping an eye on. He was the tight end we drafted in the 6th round out of Georgia, I believe. He was a guy who's had more drops than catches so far in the preseason, but he did get a touchdown in last night's game. So I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to get him a roster spot, because like I mentioned, currently on the roster you have TJ Hawkinson, Jesse James, who are the 2 locks, but you have Logan Thomas, Isaac Nawada, Jerome Cunningham, and Austin Taylor. So there's 6 tight ends. I don't think we're going to be running 6 tight ends into that 53-man roster. So it'll be interesting to see if Nawada was able to do enough to get him a roster spot, or if maybe he'll go to the practice squad. Be interesting to see how that plays out. And Joe, did you just going back to last night's game, did you happen to see that Travis Fulgham catch that was called incomplete? I know me and my dad were watching it last night, and at that point, it was one of those things where he went up to catch the ball close to the out of bounds line. He got his toe down, but his heel ended up touching the out of bounds line, and they ended up on review calling it an incomplete pass. That seemed really weird to me because, their argument was that if you're having the front part of your foot come down, the heel also has to be able to come down in bounds. But if you think of like the classic toe drag along the sideline, they're not getting their heel down in bounds as they're dragging that toe. So it seemed weird to me, and it seemed like just another example of sort of a weird rule going against the Lions. Good that we got it out in preseason, but did you catch that play at all?
Well, typically when they have the toe drag, they're on the tail ends of their toes, and they're fully extended, they catch the football 2 feet in bounds on the tip of the toes, and then they fall out of bounds, and their whole body hits out of bounds at once. It's not often that you see, the toe drag and then the heel come down. So I don't know if it's the right call or not. I didn't see the play personally, but from what it sounds like when you have both feet in bounds and the only thing that's able to hit in bounds are the toes before your entire body is out of bounds, then that would prove that it's an inbounds catch. If you have your toes in bounds and then you set your foot down, I guess they're kind of saying that the toe with the heel hitting the ground has to be all the way in bounds. Otherwise, your complete section of your foot is not fully in bounds. It's a real gray area. Mm-hmm. It's either 2 feet in bounds on your tippy toes and hit the body out on the ground outside of the boundaries, or it's have your full feet in bounds when you catch the football.
Yeah, it certainly seemed like a interesting call. So, yeah, I think you're right with it being sort of a weird gray area where, obviously with reviews nowadays, I think they throw it back to New York to help make the decision. So, hopefully the NFL, you sort of trust them to be able to enforce their own rules. But yeah, it definitely seemed weird because, as we mentioned, the toe drag is certainly a thing. So it was kind of weird to see, okay, he got his toes down, but because his heel hit out of bounds, and it looked, at least from what I was seeing in the play, it looked like his toes were down and then his heel hit. But maybe they were saying that it was simultaneous, and since the heel was out of bounds, I could see that, but it definitely seemed weird to me during the game. But, I was definitely encouraged what I saw out of Travis Fulgham. Obviously, he's another one of the rookies we drafted in this year's draft. I want to say he finished with like 3 catches and 80 yards or something like that. So a decent performance there in his preseason finale, and I think he'll definitely be on the roster, especially with Jermaine Kearse being on the injured reserve. And of course, the injured reserve doesn't count towards that 53-man roster limit, so they'll hang on to him. But with him being on the injured reserve, that does free up a roster spot. And as we've sort of mentioned with the receivers, of course, Galladay, Jones, and Amendola are the big 3. Potentially we could see Travis Fulgham step up and be that 4th receiver. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on him because I think he's a pretty good lock for the active roster. So it'll be interesting to see if he can't contribute in the regular season because, yeah, I think he had a pretty strong finish to the preseason, and I liked what I saw out of him in the previous game. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens when Stafford's throwing him the ball.
Yeah, the wide receivers, they got to come to perform. I mean, you got the starters, Marvin Jones, you got Kenny Galladay, Danny Amendola. I mean, how often do you see 4 or 5 wide receivers on the field at one time with the line? I mean, I use their playbook all the time on Madden, and not that it's the same or anything, but generally the 4th wide receiver is a tight end. So there's not really a lot of talent that you have to look at to fill the number 4 and 5th spot, but at least you'd like a guy to be able to catch the football and run the route. If you can do that, speed don't matter, breakaway, break tackle, agility, juke. If you can catch the ball and get open, then you're an effective 4th or 5th wide receiver.
Certainly. I think the big thing there is, yeah, you're right, being able to run the routes and catch the ball. If you can do those things, it sets you up for success because you're definitely not being counted on to be the number 1. So if you can do those 2 things and do them well, you're setting yourself up to help contribute to the team. And yeah, I mean, with the preseason, as we mentioned, now over, behind us. Looking forward to this first game coming up against the Cardinals. Of course, that game's being played on Sunday. September 8th. Kickoff is the 4:25, so it will be one of the late afternoon games since we are
Not this Sunday, but next Sunday.
Yep, not this Sunday, but the following one. So we have 1 week until the season kicks off for the Lions. Of course, the season itself kicks off Thursday night with the Packers and the Bears, kicking off the 100th season of the NFL. But the Lions getting started in Arizona. 4:25 is the kickoff time there. Again, with the game being played in Arizona, makes sense that we're the late game because I believe Arizona's Mountain Time, so they're 2 hours behind us, I believe, here in the Eastern Time Zone. So makes sense, but you're going to have to wait a little bit longer than some of the other NFL fans to see our team in action. But it'll be good. I think we'll definitely do a preview of the game and talk about it a little more in depth. But we've mentioned it throughout the preseason. The Cardinals, rookie head coach, rookie starting quarterback, certainly an opportunity for the Lions to be successful. So after what has been a disappointing preseason and the fact that we weren't able to see a whole lot of victories, even though the victories don't mean for a whole lot, it'll be hope. We said the number one thing we want to see out of them is starting strong. So they have a team that they definitely can start strong against. So, but yeah, and in terms of today's video, talking about the Browns game, fourth preseason game, not a whole lot. Unfortunately, another loss, but preseason's done. We can now turn our attention to the games that matter, and definitely looking forward for the season to kick off next Sunday. If you enjoyed the show, please do help the channel grow. Hit that like button. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're a subscriber and you're back tuning into our videos, of course, happy to have you back and hope you'll continue to join us here throughout the season as we continue to publish content. Hopefully going to have some exciting programming things coming your way shortly. Here through these last couple of weeks of preseason, we've just been doing the preview and the recap games of the Lions themselves. We're going to be introducing some new content to the channel moving forward, doing some things, taking a look at mine and Joe's game of the week is one item, and doing some pick'em like we did previously on Facebook Live, as well as, of course, still featuring the Lions weekly matchup, and potentially doing some other stuff that will hopefully be entertaining for everybody out there. But that'll do it for episode number 15 of the Lions Grid. We will be back shortly here. I'm not sure if me and Joe will talk about it offline, but we may do a video to just briefly talk about the kickoff of the NFL season. Obviously, like I mentioned, the first game's Thursday between the Packers and the Bears. So even though the Lions aren't involved, two of our NFC North rivals, so something we may cover a little bit. So we may be back before the game preview for the Lions and the Cardinals.
It might be good to talk about some other NFL action other than just the Lions.
Yep.
To change up the pace a little bit, because I know for me, watching these Lions during preseason, it was very difficult because I didn't see very many good plays at all. So if there's something to talk about in the Chicago Green Bay game, then I'm sure we'll bring it up.
Certainly, and of course, we're going to get to see both of those two teams twice this season. So, even though
it's all relative.
Yep, it's part of that Lions grid. It's even though we're not directly playing them that week, there could be some things that end up impacting the Lions season. So certainly we'll be back with that. But yeah, just want to thank everybody for tuning in. We will be back with more videos shortly, and just have a great day. And Joe, Joe, I did forget to mention, we talked about it yesterday. Your alma mater, your Chippewas getting the victory. So shout out to them. And then of course my team, the Spartans, playing today against Tulsa. Hopefully they can follow suit and get a win. But Chippewas looked good in their first bit of action.
Yeah, I didn't watch too much of the game. I tried to hook up my computer to my television so I could watch it, but it wasn't working. And then I went to ESPN on my PlayStation, and it wasn't syncing up. So I ended up just watching the Lions and then a little bit of the Cincinnati UCLA game. And I mean, that wasn't very good. But what I did see from the Central game when I did tune in on my computer was that their defense looked pretty good. And then when I looked at the score the next day, they put up 38 points. So it tells me they're moving the offense. Already they have tied their win record from last year. So really, I mean, the only place they can go is up.
Yeah, yeah, and they had. I mean, obviously, Albany isn't necessarily the Albany Great Danes as they are. They're not necessarily one of the premier programs in the league, but it was good to see Central get out there and establish themselves. Your quarterback threw for almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jonathan Ward, your senior running back, had like 150 yards and like 2 touchdowns or something like that. So, yeah, Albany is an FCS team, but I think you guys definitely did. You played well, despite
It's good to pick up those numbers, get the victory, put up some points, and gain some confidence. These players, after last year, playing so awful and not having a game plan really, to come out and put together a complete football game. I mean, they got to be going into the next week, this week coming up, with a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, coming off a rough season, definitely good to see them get some momentum underneath them, and hopefully the Lions can follow suit and take a page out of the Chippewas book here, because again, we said it's important to start a season strong. I think the Chippewas came out, started the season strong. Hopefully my Spartans can do the same, and hopefully the Lions will be able to do so next Sunday against the Cardinals, because I think it does go a long way to sort of get you get that ball rolling down the hill. So we'll see how it goes for Michigan State and the Lions, but so far Central definitely representing the state of Michigan well. But yeah, that'll do it for us today. We'll be back with more. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you during the next video. Peace.